The moment should have been legendary. The birth of a sneaker empire, the next chapter in Steph Curry's dominance. Instead, within weeks, it became a nightmare. Sales collapsed, the internet mocked him, and Under Armour lost $600 million overnight. But when Steph started digging for answers, he uncovered something even worse. This wasn't just a failure. It was sabotage. The arena was electric. The kind of energy that made the air feel heavy, charged, alive. 1,000 flashes from cameras, the rhythmic thumping of bass through the sound system, the collective breath of an audience holding onto a moment they all knew was about to be historic. The stage was set. A massive screen flickered to life, revealing a montage of Steph Curry's journey, grainy footage of him at Davidson, draining impossible threes. Draft night, his name called after teams passed on him. Early days in Golden State, the baby-faced kid with too much to prove. Championship runs, MVP speeches, breaking records that once seemed untouchable. The voiceover was crisp, almost cinematic. From overlooked to unstoppable. From doubted to dominant. This isn't just a sneaker. It's a symbol, a reminder that the game is yours to change. Then, the lights cut out completely. Silence. And then, boom. A spotlight erupted, illuminating the center stage. And standing there, clad in a sleek black tracksuit, holding the newest signature sneaker in his hands, was Steph Curry himself. The Curry 3. A moment that should have been etched into sneaker history. The crowd exploded. Fans screamed his name. Journalists scribbled notes furiously, already preparing headlines. The energy was undeniable. This was it. This was the moment Steph stepped into a different kind of greatness. Not just a basketball legend, but a brand, a mogul, a force outside the court. He had watched MJ do it. He had watched Kobe and LeBron do it. And now, it was his turn. Backstage, the air was thick with confidence. Under Armour executives buzzed with excitement, high-fiving each other, whispering projections about record-breaking sales. We're talking next-level domination. One of them had told Steph in a meeting just weeks before the launch. Curry 3 is going to disrupt the industry. It's built different. Lightweight, performance-enhanced, everything a modern athlete needs. We're thinking best-selling sneaker of the year. Hell, maybe the decade. Steph had nodded. He liked the design, liked the way it felt, the way it moved with him. It wasn't flashy like some of the other signature sneakers on the market, but that wasn't the point. "This is me," he had said, turning the shoe over in his hands. "And this," the execs assured him, "is going to solidify your legacy beyond the game." And why wouldn't he believe them? He had spent his entire life proving people wrong. From the moment he picked up a basketball, people told him he wasn't built for the league. Too small, too weak, too fragile. He turned that doubt into dominance. The Curry 3 was just another chapter in that story. Another chance to remind the world that he wasn't just a player. He was a force. And for a brief moment, he believed it. The first warning signs were quiet. A few murmurs here and there. A social media post that caught his eye. A sneakerhead on Twitter posting a picture of Curry 3s sitting untouched on a store shelf, captioned, "Damn, guess nobody wants these, huh?" Steph scrolled past it. One guy's opinion. Who cares? But then there was another post. And another. Within weeks of the launch, something wasn't adding up. The sellout moment never came. Stores that were expected to run out of stock in days still had shelves full of Curry 3s. Retailers started quietly marking down prices. First 10% off, then 30%, and before long, clearance sales. Steph heard whispers from his team. Something wasn't right. "We're still analyzing the numbers," one of his marketing reps told him on a call. "Might just be a slow start. You know how it goes. Sometimes people take time to warm up to a new design." That made sense, didn't it? But then came the reviews. And they weren't just bad. They were brutal. "The ugliest basketball shoe I've ever seen. Looks like something my dad would wear to Home Depot. Damn, Steph. I love you, man. But what is this?" The memes started flooding in. Steph felt it. The shift. The energy. The way people talked about him differently. It wasn't just about the shoe. It was about him. They weren't just calling the sneaker a failure. They were calling him a failure. And that was something he wasn't ready for. Steph sat alone in the locker room one night, staring at his phone, scrolling through comment after comment. review after review. It wasn't just random fans now. It was major sneaker blogs. It was ESPN segments. It was business insiders questioning if Under Armour had made a mistake betting so much on him. And then came the headline that hit him like a punch to the gut. Under Armour loses $600 million. The Curry curse? He froze. $600 million. He knew sneaker deals were big money. He knew his contract was worth over $200 million. But this was something else. This wasn't just a rough launch. This was a disaster. The calls started coming in from Under Armour, from his agents, from investors. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted to know what went wrong. And for the first time in a long, long time, Steph didn't have one. The collapse of a dream. Steph didn't need the official sales reports to know something was wrong. He felt it in the way people around him carried themselves differently. Conversations that once felt easy and celebratory now felt clipped, voices dipping just a little too low when he walked past. His marketing team, once so eager to update him on projections and performance, had gone unusually silent. The energy in the Warriors facility, usually buzzing with respect and admiration, had a strange undercurrent to it, a tension he couldn't quite put his finger on. Then, when the numbers finally arrived in his inbox, he realized why. The sales figures were a disaster. He stared at the screen, reading the email over and over again, hoping that somehow the numbers would shift, that the reality staring back at him would change. The Curry 3 had underperformed by nearly 70% compared to his previous models. Under Armour stock had plummeted in response, wiping out over $600 million in market value. The sneaker had been positioned as a revolutionary shift for his brand, the moment he stepped into true mogul status alongside Jordan and Kobe, but instead, it had flopped so hard that investors were now questioning if the company had ever been wise to bet on him in the first place. And then came the media storm. It started in the sneaker community. Major blogs and YouTubers shredded the design, mocking its lack of flair, calling it uninspired, unimaginative, downright ugly. They compared it to orthopedic shoes, something a suburban dad would wear to mow the lawn. The memes flooded the internet, relentless in their cruelty. One post showed a picture of the Curry 3 next to a pair of nurse's clogs with the caption, "Spot the difference." Another had a side-by-side of Steph holding the shoe with the phrase, "When you have a game at 7, but gotta coach a little league team at 8. It was endless, inescapable, humiliating. But what hurt even more was when the criticism stopped being about the sneaker and started being about him. For years, Steph had been fighting against the idea that he wasn't built for the cultural dominance that other NBA superstars had. He had changed the game, revolutionized the three-point shot, shattered records, but when it came to the sneaker business, to pop culture influence, to global icon status, he had never quite been mentioned in the same breath as Jordan or LeBron. Now, with the Curry 3's failure, those whispers turned into outright declarations that he had never belonged in that conversation to begin with. It wasn't just a bad shoe. It was a failure that was being used as proof that Steph Curry wasn't as big as he thought he was. The Under Armour executives who had once spoken with unwavering confidence about his ability to carry their sneaker division now seemed distant. Their calls, once filled with excitement and aggressive strategies, became more structured, more formal, less personal. There were no more reassurances, no more talk of long-term plans or legacy building. Behind closed doors, meetings were happening without him. Discussions that should have involved his input were suddenly taking place without his knowledge. And then the first real blow landed. A late-night call from his agent came with the kind of calm, measured tone that immediately sent alarm bells ringing. Steph was in his home gym when the phone vibrated on the bench beside him. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, checked the name, and answered. "They want to restructure." For a second, he thought he had misheard. "What do you mean restructure?" His agent hesitated, exhaling slowly before speaking. "They don't see you as the same marketable athlete anymore." The words sent a chill through him, a slow wave of realization washing over his entire body. He had spent his entire career proving people wrong, forcing his way into conversations he was never meant to be a part of, becoming the player no one thought he could be. But this wasn't about basketball. This wasn't about how well he could shoot or how many rings he had. This was business, cold and calculating. And in the eyes of a billion-dollar company, he was just another asset losing value. Under Armour had invested in him, believing he was on the verge of global sneaker dominance. Now that the numbers didn't reflect that, they were considering cutting their losses. His $200 million contract was suddenly under threat. The idea that had once seemed impossible, that he could be replaced just like that, was now a conversation happening in boardrooms without him. He had always believed that his game would speak for itself, that as long as he kept winning, kept dominating, everything else would fall into place. But what if that wasn't true? What if they had never seen him as a true icon to begin with? If the memes and online roasting had been bad, the press conference was worse. He had done hundreds of media sessions throughout his career. Post-game interviews, championship celebrations, MVP speeches. He had always been in control. He knew how to handle the questions, how to give the right answers, how to turn the narrative in his favor. But this time it was different. Sitting at the long table, flanked by his agent and a corporate rep from Under Armour, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pressure. Not the kind that came with taking the final shot in a playoff game. Not the kind that came with defending a championship. This was different. This was pressure to prove he still mattered. The reporters didn't hold back. One of them leaned forward, voice sharp, cutting straight to the point. "Steph, do you think the Curry three's failure proves that you just don't have the same cultural impact as guys like Jordan or LeBron?" The words are like a gut punch. It wasn't just about the shoe anymore. It wasn't about sales figures or stock prices or marketing strategies. It was about him, about whether he had ever belonged in the conversation in the first place. His mouth felt dry. He wanted to push back, wanted to argue, wanted to explain. But instead, he said nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. That night, Steph didn't go home. Instead, he drove back to the Warriors' practice facility, parked his car, and walked inside without turning on the lights. The gym was empty, the court silent, the echoes of past victories now replaced by the weight of uncertainty. He walked to the far end, where the equipment racks were lined up, and pulled down a box. Inside, neatly stacked, were rows of Curry threes. He sat down at the edge of the court, pulled a pair from the box, and turned them over in his hands. This was supposed to be the start of something great, something lasting. Instead, it felt like a funeral for his brand. He had spent years proving doubters wrong, proving that he belonged, proving that he was bigger than the limits people placed on him. But for the first time in a long time, Steph Curry wasn't sure if he had anything left to prove. And worse, he didn't know if anyone would believe him, even if he did. The silence of the Warriors' practice facility felt suffocating. The overhead lights cast long shadows across the polished court, stretching out like ghosts of every shot Steph had ever taken here. He sat there, still gripping a pair of Curry threes in his hands, staring at them as if they held an answer to the question that had been haunting him. Had I really failed? The thought lingered, heavy and unshakable. He had spent his whole life proving people wrong, proving that he was more than what they expected of him. But this wasn't a bad game, a shooting slump, or even a lost championship. This felt like the beginning of the end. And then his phone rang. He almost didn't answer. It was past midnight. But when he saw the name flashing on the screen, his pulse quickened. "Yo, Steph, listen to me. I think you were sabotaged." The words stopped him cold. He pressed the phone tighter against his ear, his voice low, steady, masking the storm building inside him. "What did you just say?" The voice on the other end belonged to someone deep inside the sneaker industry. Someone who had worked for both Under Armour and another major competitor. Someone who knew how the game really worked. "I can't go into details over the phone," the man continued, urgency in his tone. "But I've been looking into the numbers, the campaigns, the way your shoe was handled in certain markets. Something doesn't add up. And when I connected the dots, I found something that, man, you need to see this yourself." Steph stood up, his heart pounding. "Where are you?" "Meet me tomorrow. You're going to want to see this in person." The call ended, leaving behind only the sound of his own breathing. For the first time in weeks, Steph felt something other than doubt. He felt fire. The meeting took place in a small, dimly lit office in downtown San Francisco, far from the cameras, far from the corporate boardrooms that had once spoken of him as their golden ticket. Steph sat across from the man, who slid a folder across the table toward him. "Everything you need to know is in there," the man said, his voice tight with hesitation. "But I'll break it down for you." Steph opened the folder and began flipping through the documents. What he saw made his stomach turn. Emails, memos, marketing directives, documents from a rival sneaker giant, proving that they had actively worked to sabotage the Curry 3 launch. Influencers were paid to mock the design, exaggerate its flaws, and discourage buyers. Retailers were instructed to downplay the shoe, limit shelf space, and push competing products. Fake reviews flooded the internet, amplifying the narrative that the Curry 3 was a failure before people even had a chance to try them. It wasn't just bad marketing. It was a coordinated takedown. Steph felt his grip tighten around the papers, his mind racing. They never wanted me to succeed. The entire industry had been watching him, waiting for any sign of weakness, any moment where they could strike, because to them, he wasn't supposed to be here. He was never meant to be Jordan, never meant to be LeBron. And when he had started to get too close, they had pulled the rug out from under him. "How deep does this go?" he finally asked, his voice dangerously calm. The man hesitated. "Deep enough that if you go public, this gets ugly. Lawsuits, countersuits, disastrous. These people don't play fair." Steph exhaled slowly. He knew what that meant. He could take this information, expose everything, and watch the industry burn. Or he could do something even bigger. Steph sat in his car for a long time after that meeting. The city lights blurred outside his windshield, glowing like distant stars. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel, the weight of what he had just learned pressing down on him. He had two choices. He could go public, blow the whole thing wide open, sue for damages, drag their name through the mud the way they had done to him. Or he could do what he had always done. He could fight back the only way he knew how. The thoughts settled in his chest like a slow-burning ember. If they thought they had buried him, they were dead wrong. He wasn't going to be another cautionary tale, another player who tried and failed to build something bigger than basketball. He was going to make them regret ever doubting him. The next morning, Steph called his team into a meeting. The energy in the room was different. This wasn't the same man who had sat in silence at that press conference, who had let the world question his worth. This was the real Steph Curry, the one who had never let the odds stop him before. He stood at the front of the room, his hands resting on the table. His voice was steady. "We're not backing down." The room went silent. One of his advisors hesitated. "Steph, you know this is going to be an uphill battle. The market is already against us." Steph cut him off. "So was the NBA when I got drafted. So was every scout who said I was too small. So was every analyst who said I'd never be an MVP. And guess what? I proved them all wrong." A slow shift rippled through the room. The doubt in their eyes started to fade. He continued. "They wanted to kill my brand before it ever had a chance to grow. They wanted people to believe I wasn't built for this. That's exactly why we don't stop. We rebuild. We redesign. We make something that no one can ignore." Then he pulled out a new blueprint, a redesigned version of the Curry sneaker. Sleek, innovative, built not just for hype but for actual performance. "We make this better. We don't chase trends. We set them. And this time, we do it on our terms." The energy in the room shifted entirely. His team sat up straighter. The hesitation in their eyes was replaced with something stronger. Determination. That afternoon, Steph released a statement. A short video. Just him standing on the court. A simple message. "They said I couldn't make it to the NBA. They said I was too small, too weak. I proved them wrong. Now they say I can't build a sneaker empire. Let's see about that." Within hours, the video exploded. It wasn't just a comeback. It was a declaration of war. The moment the Curry 4 hit the shelves, the world knew it wasn't just another sneaker release. It was a message, a symbol of everything Steph Curry stood for. This wasn't just about sales or brand strategy anymore. This was about a fight against doubt, against the system, against the idea that he didn't belong among the sneaker giants. Every step of the launch was orchestrated with precision, authenticity, and raw defiance. The ads didn't just highlight the shoe's sleek design or cutting-edge performance tech. They told a story, the story of a man who had been counted out, who had been mocked, who had been cast aside and told he wasn't big enough for the stage he dared to step on. And yet here he was standing right back in the fire, unshaken. When the sales numbers rolled in, the response was unprecedented. Stores couldn't keep them in stock. Pre-orders shattered projections. Demand soared so high that even the most cynical industry analysts had to admit they were wrong. The Curry 4 wasn't just a comeback. It was a revolution. Sneakerheads who had once ridiculed his previous models now praised the design, the feel, the performance. Fans who had stayed loyal through the storm wore them like a badge of honor, as if to say, we never doubted him. We knew he'd be back. But beyond the numbers, beyond the financial success, the real victory was something deeper. This wasn't about a sneaker anymore. This was about a man who refused to quit. The media had spent months picking apart his failure, calling him overrated, out of place, a failed mogul in a space dominated by bigger names. They had written their headlines, made their jokes, and moved on, expecting him to fade into the background as just another athlete who had tried and failed to build a brand. But instead of running from the noise, Steph had rewritten the script. He had built something stronger, something undeniable, something that no amount of corporate sabotage or public humiliation could erase. The sneaker world had tried to bury him. Now, they had no choice but to put him on the throne. Months later, after the dust had settled and the comeback was complete, Steph sat across from a journalist in a televised interview that the world had been waiting for. The setting was intimate. Just 2 chairs, a dimly lit studio, and a single camera capturing every expression, every word. The interviewer leaned forward, voice calm but pointed, the question cutting through the silence like a blade. Steph, after everything you went through, the failure, the backlash, the sabotage, what did you learn from all of this? Steph didn't answer right away. He let the question hang in the air for a moment, his hands resting lightly on his knees, his eyes thoughtful but unwavering. He had spent so long fighting, proving, rebuilding, but now, sitting here on the other side of it all, he realized the answer was simple. A small smile crossed his lips, but there was no arrogance in it, just the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the worst and refused to let it define him. That failure isn't the end, he said finally, his voice steady. It's just the part where you decide what happens next. And with that, the world understood why they had never been able to count him out. The Curry 4 wasn't just a best-selling sneaker. It was proof that resilience was stronger than reputation, that setbacks were nothing more than setups for comebacks. Years from now, when people look back at this moment, they wouldn't just see a shoe. They would see a story, one that reminded them that no matter how hard you fall, you always get back up.